In a close vote, the North Carolina House of Representatives decided in 2017 not to request a national convention of states. The convention would work to amend the U.S. Constitution, but state lawmakers didn't kill the idea, and our next guest hopes to see a positive vote on that topic this time around. Mark Meckler is president and founder of the Convention of States Project. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you, Mitch.
We're going to talk a little bit about what you hope to see in North Carolina, but first, remind us, what is this Convention of States all about?
You know, it goes back to the very genesis of our Constitution. On September 15th, 1787, Colonel George Mason stands to address the Assembly. It's 2 days before the end of convention. And he notices that there's a flaw in the document. He says, "We failed to give the states and the people acting through the states the power to propose amendments to the Constitution if they deem them necessary. We've given that right to Congress, but not to the people." And he asks a question that I think resonates all the way through to today. He says, "Are we so naive that we believe that a federal government that becomes a tyranny will ever propose amendments to restrain their own tyranny?" Now, we know what the answer was, interestingly, because Madison's notes say "nin com." In Latin, that means no comment. There's literally no debate. I wish we had video. I bet they laughed, right, Mitch? And ultimately, we can tell, too, because unanimously they adopt to give us this right. And so what we're working on right now is a project to get the requisite number of states, 2/3 of the states, 34, to call for a convention of states, specifically to propose amendments to restrain the scope, power, and jurisdiction of the federal government.
Where do you stand right now on getting those states?
Right now, we're over a third of the way there. It's historic. We've gotten 12 states on board, and we're hoping that North Carolina becomes lucky number 13.
Now, if the convention is called and all of the delegates get together, what kinds of amendments are you looking for?
Well, it's what's called a subject matter application, which means there are three subject matters that have been proposed. First is anything that would impose fiscal restraints on the federal government. That would be things people are commonly familiar with, like a balanced budget amendment. Importantly, though, it can be combined with things like imposing generally accepted accounting principles on the federal government. A balanced budget without that kind of stuff just doesn't do anything. Second is anything that would impose scope and jurisdiction restraints on the federal government. This is where we go back to something more like the enumerated powers, telling the federal government these are the things that you may not do. Things like the federal government shouldn't be involved in education here in North Carolina, or environment, or commerce, all these things that came out of the invented power under the Commerce Clause. And the last is anything that would impose term limits on the federal government. People commonly think of that as term limits on Congress, but it would also importantly include term limits potentially on the Supreme Court, the federal judiciary more broadly, and importantly to me, on federal bureaucrats.
One of the key phrases we've been hearing in the last year or so, probably the last year and a half, is this idea of draining the swamp in Washington, D.C. Are you telling people that, hey, this convention of states could actually address this goal if that's your goal?
I actually think it is the only way to address this goal. You know, we've watched a new administration come in, and we've watched what is referred to commonly now as the deep state react against it. And we see it's deep, it's huge, it's entrenched, it has power in the judiciary, it has power in these, what I think are mostly unconstitutional administrative agencies. And without rooting out that power at a structural level, it is literally impossible to drain the swamp. So yeah, that's definitely our goal.
Some people, when you talk to them about this idea, they say, well, why not just go in and amend the Constitution in the way that it's been amended 27 other times? Why go through this state process?
I think that's a great question, and the answer is found in the amendments themselves. We don't find any amendments that limit federal government power. And that's the whole point. The system is now out of balance. It's important to remember that the states gave birth to the federal government, not the other way around. Ultimately, the states are supposed to have the power to restrain the federal government. We haven't done so to date. It's time to do it. The federal government, Congress itself, can you imagine Congress proposing term limits on itself?
That is the voice of Mark Meckler. He is president and founder of the Convention of States Project. Now, we mentioned at the outset, this is not a brand new idea in North Carolina. The State House of Representatives took this up last year, and after a very rousing debate, there was a vote. It was 59 to 53 not to seek the convention, but they did agree to put this back in a committee and allow it potentially to be taken up again. When you heard about this result and why people said they were for it, why people said they were against it, what did you think?
I'm not surprised. It's a new idea to a lot of folks, and so some folks are scared of something that they've never heard of and they're not familiar with. It's also mostly, and I would say mostly, it's important, there are exceptions, but mostly a party line vote. And what we see is folks who like statist power, folks who like the status quo, tend to line up against this. They like power centralized in Washington, D.C. And again, there are exceptions to what I'm about to say, but mostly that's on the Democratic side of the aisle. We had a few Republicans align with the Democrats and vote this down, but it was really close, and it's going to be close again this time.
Now, I think one of the things that people who are right of center, who have had some concerns about this, say, wait a minute, this would be opening up a Pandora's box. If you start this process, you don't know where it's going to lead. When people raise that objection to you, what do you say?
Well, I mean, first of all, we ask them, and I think this is the important question, Mitch, where did you get that idea from? And this is really important because there is a history to where that argument comes from. And where it comes from, literally in American history, is in the 70s. It comes from the radical left. And here's why. In 1973, you get Roe versus Wade. Shortly after Roe versus Wade, a bunch of states start passing Article 5 applications to overturn that. A conservative figure by the name of Phyllis Schlafly writes to Chief Justice Warrenberger and asks him, the Chief Justice who gave us Roe versus Wade, what do you think of this idea about a convention to overturn it? So what do you think he says? He didn't say it was a great idea. He said it could be a runaway convention. That's where the whole idea of runaway convention comes from. And frankly, the left has been using it against the American right ever since then to stop us from using our constitutional authority to restrain a runaway federal government.
Now, for those who have the concerns about a runaway convention, what within the Convention of States would help ensure that's not going to happen? The only issues that will be covered would be the ones that they really want to see.
Sure. Well, there are multiple layers of protection. I'm going to start with the end first because I think that's the simplest, and that is it takes 38 states to ratify anything that would come out of convention. I don't care what amendment you propose. You can make it radical left or radical right. It is literally impossible to do the math and come up with 38 states that would approve something radical. I'll tell you the one I hear the most often. We're going to lose our right to keep and bear arms. They're going to impose on the Second Amendment. And I would just tell people who think that to give me the state count, because remember, it takes only 13 states to stop something if it takes 38 to ratify. Do the math. North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas, Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, the Dakotas, Wyoming, Nebraska. You can come up with far more than 13 states, and it just takes one house in each of those 13 states that would never ratify that sort of amendment. So the math literally makes it impossible for there to be a runaway convention that could take away our rights.
You're pushing for this in North Carolina, and I assume in other states as well. Are there other states that seem to be on the horizon for getting this moving?
Well, right now, most of the state legislatures are out of session. We do have Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Michigan still proceeding in this legislative session, a bunch of year-round legislatures, so easier to keep those things going. But yeah, I mean, we're active in all the states that we haven't passed. We're active during the legislative sessions, and in the off-session, we're generally working with grassroots and meeting with legislators all over the country.
If people kind of are interested in this idea, don't quite know whether they're for it or against it, are there good resources for them to look at?
There are. They can go to conventionofstates.com, and pretty much everything that they could want is there. If they look at the FAQs, they'll get a great summary of the facts. They'll get a great summary of the pros and the cons, what people are scared about, what people are not scared about. I think this is one of the most important things, though, Mitch. When I don't know a lot about something, I look to people who I respect their opinion on politics and political matters like this. I look to people like Mark Levin. I look to people like Sean Hannity. I look to people like Rand Paul, who I think has been a hero on budget matters. All of these folks and many, many more are endorsers of the Convention of States project.
Now, moving forward, here in North Carolina specifically, it's going to be a rally right outside the state legislative building, between the legislative building, legislative office building. Tell us what's going to be happening.
Well, it's going to be pretty exciting. I love going to these rallies more than almost anything I get to do because lots of grassroots folks come out. I do them all over the country. We've had a growing grassroots movement here in North Carolina. We're expecting 150, 200 people to show up. It is tomorrow, so that's Tuesday at 10:30 outside the state legislative office buildings. I know you had a chance to meet the Liberty Llama, so we're going to have the Liberty Llama there. Probably even pose for a couple of pictures of the Liberty Llama. So it's going to be fun, and then we're going to go into the building. We're going to meet with legislators. Hopefully people will come and lobby their own legislator, their own representative to pass the Convention of States resolution.
Have you heard any good positive signs or even signs of things that you need to do some work on to change the vote from 2017 into a better result for you this time?
We've heard that it's very close. I mean, really, it's I would say it's a coin toss right now. It happens this way in a lot of legislatures. What we know for sure, 100%, because we have the polling, we have the numbers in each district. In every single, at least Republican state legislative district in the state, the people are in favor of this by a wide margin. So the question is, will the legislators do their job and represent their constituents? Those who vote against it, I can tell you for sure, numerically, are voting against the will of their constituents.